long time listener, first time caller. Which is a great time. I've been waiting to say something like that for years.
That's funny. I feel like I that what does that come from? Like I think that might be from the old Man Cow radio show.
Yeah, yeah. My dad used to tell me about that all the time.
Yeah, that was yeah, I'm old enough to remember that show. I don't know if it's does he still do a show?
I'm not even sure.
Yeah, he was on the radio when I was driving to high school every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Choral Podcast. This is episode 88. Music is inherently raceless, with Theron Jenkins. When discussing how music and education intersects with race, gender, culture, you name it, I find that we are often pretty quick to apply reductionist labels to the idea or concept. For example, phrases I have actually heard include, "That's a boy's song," or "choral music is inherently white," or a white art form. Or, one of my favorites, sight reading is a European value in the music education realm. If we label these things based on their past origins, are we sending unintentional signals to students now about who is welcome? I worry about that. I don't think people do it on purpose, but that is something that I think is an unintended consequence of such reductionist, almost race essentialist labels. Now, it's possible that I'm sensitive to these things because I spend too much time in Facebook comment threads, but I do see people say these things. And it raises the issue of the unintended consequence. For students and educators, when they see or hear such blatant essentialism, though often well-intended. In the latest addition to my Choral Music, a Human Art Form thread on the podcast, you can find that at the website, choralosophy.com, in the top menu. All my series are listed there. That'd be your Oxford series, the Human Art Form series, the COVID series. There's a variety of them, literacy, those types of things. They're all categorized there. And I'm going to put this one there too, because I think it fits really well, because Theron and I discussed this issue in hopes of bringing some alternative discourses to light for the purpose of making choral music more accessible and inviting to people from every background. After all, choral music does not inherently have a race, nor is group singing European. So let's not call it that. Music is inherently human, from all to all. The Patreon producers are Vasquez Academy of Music, John Warner, Ulrika Igrain, Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, Steve and Kathy Kakachik. If you would like to be a Patreon producer, there are still some slots left. Go to patreon.com/choralosophy. At that website, you have some behind the scenes info on the show. You have some behind the scenes materials, as well as conversations, plus the opportunity to participate in these future live stream episodes, which we did one. You should find recently in your podcast feed. I think it's actually right before this current episode. And you can be a part of that first one, helping me plan, helping me create topics and questions. That was a really fun format of an episode. If you've not yet listened to it, I strongly encourage you to. So head on over to Patreon and be part of the inside circle. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Theron Jenkins, and we are going to be discussing some of the ideas around music education and inclusivity and what that really means. The idea of saying that an activity is inclusive, like choir, versus the ideas that we put in place to make it actually so. And sometimes we might even have the best of intentions and do something that doesn't work, doesn't make things better, doesn't make things inclusive. And this is a tricky topic because everyone, in my opinion, some people might disagree with this, but everybody has good intentions related to this topic. In other words, they walk into their choir room wanting to include everyone. And sometimes we step forward and we make the wrong step, but sometimes these things do happen. So Theron, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's good to be here. Excited.
I'm excited to talk to you about this, and I know we've chatted a little bit in private messages over the last year or so on as topics like this come up, and of course, as you know, as somebody who listens to the show, I talk about this a lot, which would tell most people, again, kind of like my intro when you signed on, is that I care about it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean necessarily that I get it right all the time or that my opinions about it are right all the time. But I think that's where this conversation is always tricky, because sometimes in the political kind of polarized world we live in, especially when we're on the internet, uh, someone else having a different opinion as you on a topic can instantly be, well, this person doesn't care about this, or this person doesn't have good intentions as it relates to this. So, Theron, here's my first question for you. Before we
Mhm.
dive into this topic too much, I always want, of course, my guests or the audience to know a little bit about the guests and
Yeah.
where do you come from, and so as we talk about this, people will hopefully see you as a human as well.
Yeah.
And where do you come from? Where did you grow up, and how did you become a choir person? Where does that come from in your life?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty. I'm a late bloomer in the choral sense. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Um, Went to a small, private parochial school out there, and I sang in choir my sophomore year because of a girl I was interested in, and she was in choir, and I always liked to sing, and I figured I want to be in classes where she is. So I took that class, and I actually liked it a lot. We went on tour to in California and Las Vegas, and just rattling performance after performance, you kind of get a little bit of that itch of,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is kind of cool. And then for whatever reason, it just didn't work in my schedule going forward. And then it just kind of fell away. I'd always just kind of done music more individually, some garage bands here or there, and just doing stuff like that. Then I went to college in Seward, Nebraska, Concordia University. And my RA was a member of the University a cappella choir there, large, you know, 50, 60 voice group. And he invited me and my roommate to go watch their spring concert after they came back from tour. And I was like, oh yeah, I'd done something like this before. This could be kind of interesting. And I remember sitting in the audience at the church, and they did the Moses Hogan "We Shall Walk Through the Valley,"
Yeah.
and I was like a changed person. It just hearing just this wall of just beautiful sound just kind of hit you,
Yeah.
and it's hard to explain. I mean, I think you understand, like, when it happens to you, it happens. And I just, for some reason, I thought, like, I don't know what I need to do, but I got to be part of that. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to the director, I think within a week or two, and I said, like, is there like how do I get into that thing? And he's like, well, there's this audition, come and sing for me, and I want to hear your voice. And I didn't have any like real formal training. I played trumpet for a couple of years in middle school, so I'd read a little bit, but that was it. Um, I went and I sang for him, and I made the choir, and my life changed. I changed my degree. I couldn't get enough. I wanted to go to the library and grab every CD and put it on my iPod and listen to stuff. And I just couldn't get enough of it. It was honestly, that moment in college was life changing.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's like when you're telling the story about the Moses Hogan piece, immediately for some reason, the way you told the story, Bob Marley came into my brain. One good thing about music, when it hits you, you feel no pain.
yeah, yeah.
And it just washes over you, but it feels like it hits you,
hmm
especially that first time. And how old would you say you were when you heard that piece?
I think I was 19, 20 years old.
19, right?
Yeah.
Because like you said, you're a late bloomer. So then from there, talk to us a little bit about your job that you currently do, and kind of your day job, so to speak.
Yeah. So after fast forward a few years, I was, um, got married, moved to Arizona for my first job, directing choirs out there at a small parochial high school. Over the course of that time, I got my master's in choral music education at Arizona State. And then now I'm in Houston, Texas, teaching at a kind of preschool through 12th grade academy where I'm doing middle school and high school choir. I have a sixth grade choir, I have a seventh and eighth grade choir, and I have a high school choir that I then use to divide into a treble chorus and a tenor bass chorus, as well as mixed. Occasionally, as talent allows, I'll do a chamber choir, audition that out of there too. So my curricular choirs are three. and then that expands out to about 6 or 7 as, you know, as the years allow. Depending on like
Okay.
different, like when we're in contest season, it kind of opens up more. We'll do some smaller ensemble things,
Yeah.
and yeah, kind of it varies.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And so, and one thing that I'm interested too, because we are going to be talking about inclusion and diversity and some of those hot button topics that everybody likes to talk about. Um, how would you describe the racial makeup of your students?
If I were just gonna guess, in our, I'll do with the high school right now.
Yeah.
We're probably it's probably 85% Caucasian,
Okay.
and then another 15% being some combination of African American, Hispanic, Latino, however you want to qualify. Um, so it's a pretty, I mean, it's a suburban, affluent private school,
Okay.
and generally speaking, those are kind of the or the makeup in terms of racial breakdowns.
Right. Now, how is that? Compare that just again so we can get an idea of where you come from. How is that different, or is it from where you grew up?
Very different than where I grew up. Not very different than the schooling that I had, because I probably was. I think I remember in high school, and I was not in a very large school. I think we had 60, 70 kids in my graduating class, and I was one of like two minorities
Oh,
in the
wow.
whole class. So it was a very common place for me to be in a school system that looked very different than the area where I grew up
Hmm.
in Baltimore City. So, um, and that actually kind of helps with some of the students that I have, that I think where they live is very different than where they go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And finding your sense of place kind of takes a little time. You kind of got to find like, where's my niche? Is it going to be, in art, music, athletics? Is it academics? It's something that all students do, but I think when you walk in and you're obviously the outlier in terms of how you look,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the first things students sometimes try to do is like, well, where do I fit?
Yeah.
And music was a really helpful thing for me there, and I think I've even seen over the course of my time here, that's a really easy way to pull kids in, because everybody likes music, but not everybody comes in with like the choral background right away. So it's kind of like an easy like leveler in terms of playing field.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? So what's it like? Because this is something I'm fascinated from the human kind of human psychology aspect of this. I've never been one of two or three people in a school that look
Mhm.
like me. What's
Yeah.
what are some of your experiences or things you remember growing up that might have been formative to kind of how you think about this topic now from experiencing that?
Gosh, yeah. There's a lot of interesting stories I could tell. And a lot of them really positive. I think it's really easy to sometimes lean into only talking about like the difficult things that people have experienced, and I've had some of those.
Yeah.
There's been challenges, but I would also say that I've had some of the most genuine friendships. I remember this is have I mean, you're in Kansas City, so you're not far from Nebraska, but I went to a college in small town Nebraska, like 30, 40 minutes away from Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just walking around town on a Sunday morning. I'd already gone to church with my roommate, I think. I was just walking around, just kind of getting the lay of the town. And growing up in Baltimore City, like you're just kind of used to looking down. No one's gonna like look you in the eyes or like say anything to you. So I'm just walking head down, just kind of like getting the lay, kind of getting my bearings. And I suddenly hear this voice of some lady call out, like just saying, "Hey, hey, hey!" And I kind of look up, and I was like a little taken aback. And she said, "Hey, I saw you in church this morning. Um, I know you go to the college. Come over for dinner tonight." Someone I'd never met. She
Yeah.
doesn't know me from anyone. she lives in that town. She's been there her whole life. She saw myself and my roommate there in church and said, I want to have you and your roommate over for dinner. And I still, weirdly enough, that was in, 2005, 2006. I still have a connection to that lady to this day.
Wow.
She's every now and then on Facebook, she'll pop up and, it's over when I'm ever back in that town and I see her, it's just kind of like this, like one of the first people that like really reached out to some young lost kid
Yeah.
who didn't look like her at all and, just brought me in. I think I have more of those kinds of experiences than the difficult ones, which again, they happen. I've had them. I've had to grow from them. I've had to process those things, but I would say by no means is it like the litmus test, I guess, for how people engage in groups where they are maybe in the other category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because you tell that story about small town Nebraska. I'm from Kansas City, in near the city, but I have the way geography is out in the Midwest is you're either in the city for 20 or 30 minutes, or you're out in the country, and there's like not a whole lot in between. And so I feel like I've always grown up very familiar with the culture of rural, small town, for lack of a better term, white America. And what's interesting is there is a lot of stereotypes about what that would be like for a black young student, for example, male especially, to walk down the street in that Nebraska town and be, maybe be stereotyped or be looked at with distrust. But what I've noticed, and like you said, that does exist. Like that is an actual thing in some parts of small town America for sure. I've seen it. I don't want anyone to think that I don't think it exists. But what I've discovered, or what I feel like I've learned in those types of towns, is that curiosity is usually the bigger driver, like before racism, because small town America folks, if you live far enough out in the country, you just don't see people who aren't like you, like ever. And when it happens, when one is walking down the street, your instinct is like, oh, that's interesting. I want to talk to that person. And I'm wondering if you've ever kind of maybe even if it made you feel uncomfortable, but do you ever feel like you've been come up to because like somebody's just interested to talk to a black guy?
Absolutely. I think I am at least 10 or 15 people's first black friend. Like, I think I know that factually.
That's
because
funny.
I think that's even been a conversation we've had. It's like, I did not know a black person until I met you. And it's an interesting, I guess it's an interesting thing to be someone's, I guess, entryway into a potential culture of people.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of fun. Like, I think people ask a lot of interesting questions. Sometimes the questions are a little silly. Sometimes the questions are like, oh yeah, I guess it's not even like racial question, just like, what's it like growing up in a place where there's more than 1,000 people?
Right.
Like, what is it like having options of, places to go eat besides, the 2 or 3 that you have, and those are the ones that are there.
Almost as if there's more to culture than skin color.
Yeah. And I think even as young people, as college kids, we didn't always default to that. I remember giving a speech in like a public speaking class about how it was kind of like I got a little miffed because like there was this narrative going around. I was like, oh well, he's the whitest black kid I've ever met or something. I was like, what is that? What do you mean by that? Like, it's like just. So if I don't talk a certain way, or if I or because like I do choir, is like this, like and again, this kind of even ties into some of the stuff that you talk about. If we set up these particular, like, if choir is a white thing, then then already you're pushing like people away and out of the thing. But I believe that people are people first. And your culture obviously informs you, but I found that I had plenty in common with a lot of kids that grew up in small town Nebraska when we like actually spoke to each other, I was like, oh yeah, like that's something I remember dealing with in high school too, even though we went to completely different contexts of high school.
Yeah.
I still went to a private school, like a private prep school, which is very different than a rural public school.
Mm-hmm.
So not like race aside, like a private East Coast school is a very different experience than a lot of rural public schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that this is really interesting because you've actually perfectly segued to kind of the meat of this conversation. So you just touched on choir being a white thing, but you also touched on, which I love this because it's like serendipity. You touched on the idea of being kind of defined, whether ill-intentioned or not, as like, as the black guy, here are things that you should be or you should do and or speak like or whatever, which of course, I've never experienced that, but I try to put myself in I would be so pissed. Like because and that's interesting. So here's what are you familiar with the concept of blind reacting to things on the internet?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, this is going to be a Choralosophy podcast first. I'm going to ask you to blind react to a video. Okay?
Okay. Cool.
All right. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but did you know that Sidney Poitier passed away yesterday?
I found out this morning. My mom like texted me and said, "Did you see this?" I was like, "Oh no, I was in the middle of class."
Okay, yeah. So in honor of Sidney Poitier's passing, rest in peace, one of the greatest American actors of all time, I'm going to show Theron Jenkins a video of Sidney Poitier. I think this video is from 1967, and he is answering questions for a in front of a panel of, we are assuming, white journalists. So here you go. I'm not going to say anything else.
Don't forget, as you are collecting your teaching materials for the school year at any point during the school year, you can use the Choralosophy checkout code at a variety of partner websites with the Choralosophy podcast. There's ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com, which are great sources of online PDF sheet music. And I would highly encourage you to use that promo code and go check out those independent small choral business people, because they do some great work. And you might not know about them unless you decide to go and check them out. Plus, there is mymusicfolders.com, which has the new Resonance Singer's Mask that is the N95 caliber. And so that is a game changer for people who are in need of that extra protection as they continue to participate in choral music. Plus, of course, sightreadingfactory.com. You can also get your resonance imaging software at vocevista.com/choralosophy and teach your kids all about overtones. And if you're interested in more about that, I've got some lesson plans in my podcast feed that you can search.
There are many aspects to my personality that you can explore, I think, very constructively. But you sit here and ask me such one-dimensional questions about a very tiny area of our lives. You ask me questions that fall continually within the Negro-ness of my life. You ask me questions that pertain to the narrow scope of the summer riots. I am artist, man, American, contemporary. I am an awful lot of things, so I wish you would pay me the respect due and not simply ask me about those things.
Thoughts?
Ooh, yeah, that is I feel like there's a lot of people that I think can echo a lot of those particular thoughts, especially the idea that I am a lot of things. Like even like just me personally, I'm a father and I'm a husband, I'm a teacher, I'm a brother. Like I am so many things that matter not just to me, but matter to other people, and my role in those things. Are they informed by who I am in terms of my ethnic makeup? Yeah, absolutely. Like they're definitely informed by that. But to be reductionist is to be reductionist about any person based on anything is to rule out all of the other beautiful parts of what we are. And
Mm-hmm.
it's to watch, one of the greatest American actors of all time be frustrated that why are you like, of all the things you could ask me about, why are you only asking me about these things? Like, if that's how we're going to look at one another, if that's how I'm going to look at a student that walks into my room who, I haven't had the chance to teach yet, if I just make blanket assumptions about what I think they can or cannot do,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm only going to teach part of that kid. I'm not going to teach that whole child. And that's a disservice. It's a really disservice to young people and to people in general, to just be reductionist about who we are.
And it teaches them to also reduce themselves
Exactly.
going forward. And that clip I was fighting back tears the first time I saw that, because again, it's from the sense of empathy that I feel for how angry I would feel if I was being put in a box like that. And that's kind of what bothers me about it, because I was imagining him hearing questions in a news conference, and probably on a deep, artistic level, because you and I are both artists and not actors, but I don't know, maybe you're an actor. I don't know. I'm not.
Not a good.
Yeah, okay. But I'm thinking, like, maybe he was thinking, why aren't you asking me about questions about the acting choice that I made in that most recent film? Like, why did I choose to pause and look up at that one moment? Or why aren't you asking me like artistic questions, because we're here to talk about art? And then I start empathizing as a conductor, if I'm talking to a black conductor, and maybe he's in that same situation, or she, and thinking, why aren't you asking me why I phrased that differently than the Robert Shaw recording? Or why aren't you asking me about the tempo I chose at that, that moment? And because I think there's a lot of parallels to what we experience in choral music to what Sidney Poitier might have experienced as an actor.
Yeah, and I think even just some examples of that for me, where I remember, like, obviously the Hogan piece really, blew me away, and that was kind of a big launch pad for me. And I will always love anything that he's arranged, but
Mm-hmm.
there would get to the point where, like, some people would think like, so are you really excited about the spirituals we're going to do? And it's like, I mean, yeah, I like them, but is some of the favorite music, or some of the music that, like, is on my bucket list of things to ever either perform myself as a conductor or even a singer, be like, the Chichester Psalms, or, something that is not necessarily, um, I guess, to borrow. I just love the way that Marcus Garrett talks about this, like the idiomatic black choral music,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that finally put words to something that I was trying to encapsulate of, yeah, I think this genre of music is really awesome. I love it. But I think that as someone who has tried his hand at arranging, like, I want to be able to not have to only do spirituals, or not only have like be, or not have that assumption be made that if you're going to write, then you're going to write this kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're going to audition for um, a place in a group, you're going to only audition for this kind of group. You know, I know some very talented minority singers who can sing opera incredibly well, and to not have that fostered in them, because it would just be assumed that, well, you're only going to sing whatever your idiomatic culture would dictate. I mean, it closes off doors that are life changing for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of when in the intro, when I first signed on with you, one of the little um, hints that I brought about for this episode was that sometimes those types of boxes that people put others in is because it's well intentioned, in that they were taught or read on the internet, or kind of reasoned in a sideways way, that's the way we are inclusive, is by making sure that we remind everyone constantly how inequitable things have been in the past, and by pointing that out all the time. And I think that's important to talk about those things, but then by reasoning that way all the time, we end up saying things, and I'd like to hear your reaction to this too, but we end up I personally, because of the topics that I publish on this show, constantly hear things like people reminding me that choral music is inherently a white European art form. So,
Yeah,
but the
that's
yeah, go ahead.
and that's a challenging one because like, yeah, sure, if I'm talking about romantic or classical choral music, if I'm talking about, a Bach chorale, then that is I guess, a white European like element of choral music. But again, I feel like the under the umbrella of choral music, you have stuff all over the world.
Yes.
And I'm blanking on some of the publishers, but I mean there are
Like
there are
Earth Songs.
yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
even one. Like there are incredible works that are composed by people from other countries. They're like one of the best choirs I've ever heard in person is they're from Manila,
Uh-huh.
and it was we were doing a competition it was when I was in college. We were in a competition in Austria, and this choir came in and just like blew everyone away, just doing music from their culture and doing music from you know classical European culture. Like just they could do the whole thing. And
Yeah, choral music is a big deal in the Philippines.
yeah,
They love it there.
and they're really good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Like really really good. um I I guess I reject the idea of choral music is a white European thing, and therefore it must be limited. I would take more of the standpoint that choral music in general is good for, I think it is good for people. I think people should sing in groups because I think group singing is like, in my, again, this is an opinion. I think group singing is the one of the greatest things that we do as a culture. I
Yeah.
think it's group singing is how people pass on history to one another. Group singing is how people have worshipped for centuries. Group singing is like, I mean, like when we get together sometimes, and maybe not as much anymore, but when we get together with family and stuff, you recall, folk songs, I guess,
Yeah.
and that's across cultures. Every culture has some sort of folk song, some sort of music that goes from generation to generation that people know, and they can do it in unison and they can do it in harmony, and that's group singing. That's choral music.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
it's
Which
more than just Bach chorales.
is why I have beef with that phrase.
Hmm.
That's my essentially the core of my beef with the phrase that choral music is white.
Hmm.
Anytime someone utters anything that sounds something like that, my hair bristles
Hmm.
because I first think, hold on, um, linguistically, let's decide what we define choral music as,
Yeah,
because what you just described is group singing to me is choral music.
yeah,
If multiple people are singing together at the same time, then that's choral music.
yeah,
And that is inherent to all cultures through all time. It is a human art form.
yeah,
It is inherently human. It's not inherently racial. Now, like you said, there are styles and subgenres within that, and we could definitely have conversations about equitable access to those different styles and subgenres, and doing a better job within music education of presenting more of it to our students.
and even how we in American choral education, are we paying attention to what we program and how we teach? I think those are important
Mm-hmm.
conversations to think about. Are we doing only certain genres of music over and over again? Are we? I think we are better at this now than maybe we used to be maybe a while ago. But the idea that um, your big spiritual is kind of like the main, like the cherry on top of the after you do the serious music.
Right.
I think we do a really good job as directors when we have the conversations of, hey, what are you programming? Because I learn a lot about literature from talking to people, because sometimes the internet's too big. I can't like sift through it all, so I have to like one of the few things that will allow myself to remain on Facebook for is the groups, because the ones that aren't like painful to like observe in terms of discourse, like we have this really great one. I'm shout out Choir Directors of Texas. It is an incredibly helpful place for anyone who's doing choral music in the state of Texas. These people are kind and they're helpful, and anytime you have a question, it's just flooded with all of these like, oh, great response here, great response here, and you can get a rep list within 5 minutes of asking a question of stuff that like, oh yeah, I would have never thought of that, or I didn't know this existed.
Wow.
And I think we do this well when we have honest conversations about like, hey, I would love to program something from another culture. What's kind of making its way around that like I should check out. I think we are doing that more now. And I think that's an area that we as choir directors ought to like give ourselves a little bit of credit. I think we don't have to kind of like, gosh, we really missed the boat on something a long time ago. Like, okay, yeah, then let's learn from it and give our students the most well-rounded choral education that we can give them for their sake, for their growth and development.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said that, because that's something I've said on the show too several times over the years, where to on one hand acknowledge that that yes, of course, we can learn from things in the past, but also it's psychologically healthy for people to, while criticizing themselves or their profession or their whatever it is, to also recognize the successes. And I think it would be hard to deny at this point that choral music as a profession is not kind of already ahead of the game compared to a lot of general society when it comes to this topic. We've been like trying really hard to diversify what we teach students for as long as, I mean, I'm old, and since as long as I can remember being introduced to music education. Now, what that looked like. So, for example, to give you an idea, I don't want to call out any names of arrangers that are still alive, but when I was a student in college, diversifying your programming might have very well meant doing a piece in the style of an African folk song arranged by white guy McWhite Guyerton, and that was that. But here's how I look at that: as weird as that would sound to us now, from when I was a kid, that was like the next step. It was okay, let's do less Bach and less Palestrina and less of these other things, and let's do some of this world music that that was what they called it back then. And it was going to be arranged by someone who probably has never been to that country, or whatever. But what it did was it opened up my mind as a young music educator to the fact that music does sound different in different places, and that spurred my curiosity to go on and listen to music from other places. And you got to start somewhere, I guess, is my point.
Yeah. And I to kind of go off of that, I think there's whatever is that launch point that kind of gets you to explore other music, like that's, as you look back on that, you're still going to have like, okay, yeah, that might not have been the best thing that existed, but if we didn't try, then what wouldn't we be doing now?
Right.
And I love that. Even just listening to this show, I've been introduced to people like Jason Max Ferdinand and Marcus Garrett and girl conductor. What's her name? I'm blanking.
I've talked to several. Oh, Maria Ellis?
Yes, Maria Ellis.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like she was talking about the teaching rote.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to steal something that like I didn't realize that, oh yeah, I used to, when I was a kid, that's how I learned. My mom or my grandma would sing something, I'd sing, and she was like, sing it back, and I would sing it back, and all of a sudden, like, we would do like, very basic harmony and thirds of me just copying something that she's saying. And it wasn't until Maria said it that I was like, oh my goodness, like I could absolutely use this with my lesser confident singers. Like if I have brand new sixth graders, brand new to the school, they have not done choir with me yet. So that yes, the goal is literacy and reading. For me, that's my goal. By the time they finish, graduate high school, they can read. but I don't throw, leaps of a fourth in front of them on day one, but I do want them to feel comfortable using their voice. And one of the quickest ways to do it is, hey, echo me. I'm going to sing this, you sing it back. And she just kind of like reminded me of, oh yeah, my earliest music education was essentially call and response.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that's a really good point, because I did want to talk to you about sight reading too, and the idea that that sight reading is a white thing, which
Yeah, I think that's silly. That's okay. If we want to talk about like standard notation versus other ways to do notation, or whether or not there should be notation, okay, we can have that sort of maybe musicological conversation. But at some point, we have agreed as a profession that part of the choral skill set is sight reading and using whatever method, numbers, solfege. My students will fight me on hand signs, but I need to use my hands. I like to do the kinesthetic thing. I think we've decided to, on some level, that this is a thing that helps kids sing in tune better and learn music faster and grow as musicians. Students in band, they got to read. They
Yeah.
can't really play their instrument in the ensemble if you can't read the music on the page. And I think that to just say, well, sight reading is something that only white kids do, maybe what we're really saying is we've only like pushed that kind of really like that type of music literacy and music education in white spaces. If that's what we're saying, then the solution isn't get rid of sight reading. In my view, I think the solution is, how do we make sure we champion our schools and encourage music educators and encourage administrators to value quality education in their schools in the same way that they would do that for math and science and English. I mean, think about it. If someone found out that, the local public school down the street, like they just weren't learning, you, division in any, like they just weren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we wouldn't accept that as like, I guess, they just can't do it. Like we would do something about that. Like we wouldn't accept that our students are not being taught what they should be taught in their discipline.
Right. Yeah. Now, I think the issue there will be that some of the more radical amongst our colleagues would even quibble that you could relate music literacy and reading and notation to division in math, in the sense that I've even had arguments with people that is music reading and literacy even core to what we are teaching, because that's not how music started, it's almost like people arguing with people about eating a paleo diet. Seems very, very odd. But the way I think of it is that music literacy like literacy in any language, music is just a language, just like any other, is something that first of all, you can't teach music literacy without teaching by rote. Mm-hmm. So, for example, a kid has to know what do, re, mi sounds like from hearing it before they could ever hope to look at it on a page and sing it, right? In the same way that a student has to learn English by rote, by hearing it as a kid, and then hearing all these different noises and sounds, and hearing what the th sounds like, and then hearing what sounds like, and then they can read the, right? So in music, that neurologically, reading music is exactly the same, plus a bunch of other neurological benefits. So to act like music literacy is not the core of what we do is to ignore the science of the topic, which is that the kids' brains are lighting up like crazy when they're combining their rote learning that they have from the warm-ups in our class, from their childhood, like you said. They're combining all those skills into this new skill, which is called reading music. And so what I get frustrated by in this conversation is that we've siloed this into a either or thing. Like we're either teaching literacy or we're teaching by rote. No.
And I don't love the either or, because it removes the wonder. Because just last semester, we start the year, my high school mixed choir, I'll have them read, at the beginning of the class, like, on sight reading factory, I'll do like 12 measures at the beginning of the year, kind of on level 2, just kind of like, let's prime the pump a little bit. Let's just kind of get back into it. There'll be some errors, and we'll talk, and I'll ask them, where do we make a mistake? And the hands start shooting up, and the looks on their faces like, I know what we did wrong. I know what it is. Like that type of confidence organically, in that moment, like that does a lot for kids. It was like, yeah, that's what it was. Who wants to show us what it would be if we did it right? And then you give that opportunity, and all of a sudden, like this, I've had kids who would never speak up in other classes inquire because they know their voice. They've been comfortable using their voice. They trust the environment that we set up in the culture. They're some of the ones who are calling out answers the most. And then, by December, like last reading that we're doing before break, we're ripping through level 4 on sight reading factory, and the kids are like blown away. It's like, I can't believe we're singing this, like we're singing these things correctly. It's like, oh yeah, I can, because you guys like you've learned this.
It's
know
power.
How.
It's power.
Yeah, you have the ability. And when they realize, if I can do this, does that mean eventually we could do level 6? Does that eventually mean we could do 4-part reading? It's like, yeah, absolutely you can. And when I tell them this, they're floored. I tell them, you are better musicians right now as high schoolers than I was as a freshman in college in terms of your overall musicianship, because you have a skill that not only I didn't have at your age, but a lot of people do not have the ability to, here's a piece of music, and can you even figure out like what's step 1 of how to do it?
Right.
Like, I think that's really cool for kids to feel like, wow, maybe I can't dunk a basketball, but if you put this vocal line in front of me, I could sing it. I could pick a do, I could pick a tonic, and I could sing through that. And I think I don't want to rob kids, and not to say that sight reading is the only way to achieve this, but I don't want to rob kids of this particular medium because we've decided that it belongs in a certain cultural box.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's not a cultural phenomenon to take. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not a uniquely individual cultural phenomenon to take an invention that happened in some place of the world and borrow it, turn it into a new thing, and then use it for the culture's own purposes. So, for example, and it kind of goes back to when I was criticizing the term choral music is inherently white, or music notation or sight reading is inherently white. I think that word inherently is what bothers me, because inherent means like built into the very nature of the thing. Like you can't separate the nature of the thing if you use the word inherent. So if something's inherent, then you can't separate out the pieces. So, for example, I would say if we're talking about like music notation the way we use it today, it's not inherently white, but the people who created it originally were white. And those are two different, totally different statements. Okay, so this is going to be a bizarre example to illustrate my concept, but are you familiar with blue jeans, the clothing?
Yes.
Okay, of course you are. So they were invented in the American West at 1800s or so, and it had to do with something about making work clothes that were durable enough or whatever. Okay, so invented mostly by white people, and of course now they are a fashion statement in almost every country on the planet. Okay, and the reason that happened is because it was a good idea, and then other people took it and used it for their own ideas. To me, that's what, like, music literacy and music notation is no different to me. It was just an idea that some people came up with, and then because it was a good idea and it improved the efficiency of the music learning process, it spread like to everywhere. And I feel like it's weird that we try to attach some kind of, almost like creepy. It's creepy to me that we try to attach some kind of racial significance to it. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah, I just think it's I don't know, maybe it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but like if there were inequities in how we used it, that doesn't necessarily maybe mean that the thing itself is evil or something. I
Or
even
even
think,
racial.
or even, yeah, or racial. Like I think there's if there's value to something, if we, and especially if we've ascribed it, or if a different culture ascribes value to it, then we have.
Right.
And I think it's anything that a musician, especially a young musician, can put into their toolkit. Even in terms of technology, like my students are teaching me all sorts of things about like um, different ways that they're recording themselves and like make their own music.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have the confidence of doing that because they have a lot of stuff in their toolkit.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we get to provide that. That's for me, it's one of my goals as a music educator. I want kids to be lifelong musicians. I want them to be able to continue to sing in their community. I want them to continue to sing in their family. I want them to make music.
Right.
Of course, there's elements in the choral world that we could do better. We could do more in terms of improvisation. We could do more in terms of like, but I mean, for me, I only get so many minutes in the rehearsal,
Yeah.
and like it or not, I got to get ready for this concert. I got to get ready for solo and ensemble, and we got to get ready for contest. I guess if my entire choir came up to me and said, "We want to have choir and we want to like explore these other things," it's like, okay, well, I guess let's talk about that. Let's see what's possible for us.
Yeah, and
But
then you'd have to say, and that's fine, but you'd have to say, what do we want to not do then? Like
Yeah.
what do we want to decide to cancel so that we can do XYZ? And because yes, a lot of times these things are put on teachers where that we should be able to just do everything during the amount of time that we have. And this all came. This we'll kind of wrap up with this, I think, because this whole topic came to a head recently with the whole Connecticut all-state choir thing, and the aspect of trying to like take almost like as a scapegoat of the all-state choir not being diverse enough was the first thing people suggested in some circles, not everyone, but in some circles, was to make it so that people didn't have to sight read to get into the all-district choir, and it was listed specifically by this letter from UConn, which I'm calling out because I'm just I think it's a huge problem. If the whole first page of the letter is talking about ways that we could make the all-state choir more inclusive, and it specifically lists race, and then presents a solution, bullet point number 1, to having a better, more racial, equitable outcome, is change the way and or eliminate the way that we ask kids to sight read for the all-state choir.
So again, what's coded in that? And like for me, because I always want to look at what's coded in that. What something like that would read to me is like, so you don't think Black students can read, or have the capacity to? Like if you're saying that can't be a thing, then you're saying that so you don't think we can do it. If the real issue is schools that have higher amounts of Black students in choir aren't getting that type of training, well, let's deal with that.
Yes.
Maybe let's deal with that thing, because then you're pointing out that our music education is maybe not, equitable before all-state, before the audition.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly it, Theron. And the thing is, if we were to, let's say we took the advice of that letter and we changed all-state choirs all over the country and you didn't have to sight read, and we made some type of predetermined quota system where we made sure that there was a certain racial diversity in the all-state choir, and we did it by the zip codes from school districts that are failing their students in terms of music education. Okay, so in Missouri we have a couple in some of our bigger cities, school districts that just flat out don't teach kids to read music, and most of those school districts are populated by Black students. Here is the problem with that, as I see it. Again, it's the well-intentioned harms. Okay, so if those school districts, which currently don't get represented in the all-state choir in the state of Missouri, and probably this is true in Connecticut, which is why they were having this issue. Okay. All of a sudden, we put kids from those schools in all-state choir, but they haven't yet learned how to read music. They're going to show up on those days, and they're going to be behind the other students. And it's going to send the message further to those students that they are not good enough. And it won't be, and telling them that they're an all-stater won't matter when they sit down there in that choir and they see all these kids around them from all over the state that have learned how to do all these things, and they haven't learned how to do them. And what is that going to make them feel like? And then the
Right.
second problem, and I'll let you respond. The second problem that no one seems to talk about is by doing that, you would also absolve those school districts of the responsibility in the future of ever teaching those skills to those students, because they would get to put on their banners outside their schools, "We have all state choir students." And we'd be showing them that they did a good job and they're failing their students. Okay.
Right. And it's a way for it's a way for that the school can look good.
Yep.
But if there's one thing any of us who teach, especially if you teach high school, kids can sniff out BS quick.
Yep.
And they can sniff it out quicker than the adults can. They know when they're being had, and they know when you're just handing them something that's not real. I don't always like to make athletic comparisons because I don't necessarily think there's always like the overlap is not always direct, but
Right.
essentially all-state is for choir is not that different than making all-state. If you make like to make the all-state team for football or basketball or volleyball, you're recognizing these particular students as the best at their particular position and skill set in the state.
Yeah.
Based on like whatever the coaches association or the voters have determined, like these are the skills that we're looking for. Like like everybody has the opportunity or ought to, I would believe everybody ought to have the opportunity to be in their school choir, the opportunity,
Yeah.
whether the opportunity to audition, the opportunity to learn the skills to be able to pass an audition. But when we're talking about all-state, we're not talking about something that can ever be, how can you ever make it fair enough?
Right.
Because what this particular letter is doing is actually making it less fair because you're making it wholly subjective.
Yes.
And then who
put.
gets to be the judge? Who gets to be the judge in the system? Like, how are you going to make sure the judging system is fair? Like, I don't know if the actual goal, and as you've mentioned, this is well-intentioned. I don't believe this is like done to, be mean or to intentionally leave people out. But I think what would happen, the actual curricular residue of this decision is that students who are working hard of any cultural background, students who are working hard are going to be taught that that's not really what matters.
Mm-hmm.
We got to be honest. It was like, was that the goal? Is that what we want?
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you. And like I said, I've said a couple times, I think it is well intentioned. I got heated a minute ago because what bothers me and makes me emotional about this topic is that when we are presented these solutions by colleagues, and it mostly happens on the internet. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, that is an environment where those apps and Facebook and Twitter and any other place you would have these conversations, in Facebook groups in particular, those are technologically designed to silo people into opinion groups. And so if I were to take, I make all kinds of public comments as the host of this show, but in a Facebook group, then there is no way I could make that comment about that I disagree with the way that this is formulated without getting a pile-on, especially as a white male, of if I disagree with this solution to a racism problem, well, then I must also be one of the racists. Mm-hmm. That's the reality we live in.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of that reality too, even for if you're a minority and you take the same position as you do, then it's like, well, you must have sold out, or you must have. When Odell was on the show
mm-hmm.
a month or so ago, like just listening to him, like I think it was. I remember I was driving in the car listening to that show. I was like, man, this guy's really brave. Like just to say the things that he was saying on the show, it was like, because I feel like it's not easy to say I guess the thing that maybe not be 100% accepted right away without maybe thinking about it a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
But the internet it's not an easy place to, I guess, have long form, nuanced conversations.
Right. Right. And I think that's where this is important for these longer conversations where at hopefully for anyone who's still listening an hour into our conversation, where we get to this and you get to that point in the conversation where you've heard enough context about where two people are coming from, where you start to go, okay, well, so I'm fairly convinced at this point that neither of these people are opposed to having a more diverse all-state choir, because of course we want that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course we want that. But, and it seems like you and I agree in the sense that the way you have to fix that, though, is you have to fix it long term, and you have to fix it systemically by making sure that those school districts that are not teaching by zip code, ultimately, that are not teaching kids certain musical skills that they would need to be well-rounded, fully functioning, autonomous musicians, we need to go solve it at that level. And then maybe 10 years from now, when those little 6-year-olds are 16 and they've been given that music education, then I firmly believe that no matter what skin color they have, they would be fully competing with every single white suburban kid, like our students who have those resources now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's always easier to either teach or parent or operate in a way where I'll do the fast thing, fear of punishment, hope of reward. Like it's quick. It seems in the moment that you've accomplished something, but down the road, like, what have they learned?
Yeah.
And I'm more of the mind that I'm more interested in what kinds of people are we trying to make? What kinds of students do I want them to be? What kinds of people do I want them to be? Not, you know, jump through this hoop, boom, you're done, move on to the next thing. Or up, you failed, boom, you're out. Like sometimes I feel like we're oftentimes having the wrong conversation. And what is the ultimate virtue that we're looking for? What should choral music, what kind of people should choral music make?
Mm-hmm.
And do the tools that we're using, sight reading, whatever forms of literacy you're talking about, if it is not serving your philosophical ideal of like what should choral music do for students, well, then you got to deal with that. But just starting to point like, well, this is a white thing, we got to get rid of it. This thing doesn't work for these students, we got to get rid of it. Like then we're maybe hamstringing ourselves unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's like neither here nor there. That's just like, as you were talking, I was just thinking like, gosh, this is like philosophically like an important idea to
Right.
figure out, like as music educators, as teachers in general, like what are our goals here? What is our ultimate goal? What kinds of people are you trying to make? And if that's not something we've thought about, then all the other questions and things we're bickering about maybe are secondary at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really profound. I'm glad that you brought it there, because ultimately that's what motivates me too in the classroom. We talked a lot about tonight already about literacy and how we both value that in our instruction. But I don't want any listener to think that because we talked about it for 30 minutes or whatever, that we think that it's the most important or the only thing. Because there are so many other things. There's vocal technique, there's music history, there's poetry analysis, there's music theory, there's all these different other things that happen. I think for some reason, and maybe I'll let you finish with your theory on this, and hopefully some listeners will offer their ideas. But for some reason, we've chosen topics like this to be a proxy or a representation of this equity conversation. Is this music literacy thing, and I don't know why it's music literacy and not vocal technique, or music literacy and not music theory, or whatever. But we seem to talk about it a lot, and yet that's frustrating to me, because I think it is a very critical independence building skill that we've got to teach our students. It's just not optional.
Yeah, my theory is I think it's because it's not fun. Like I think
Okay.
part of it, like I think when every school, and it's only been 2 so far that I've ever gone to where I've introduced it, the growing pains are painful because it is not as fun as as me just, or for them, it's not as fun as singing songs. What I try to get them is it's more fun when you sing the music without me spoon feeding it to you. I think that's going to be more fun for you.
And
Trust
fun in the
me.
long run.
Fun, long
Yeah,
term.
which is hard for kids. That's hard.
Yeah, and it's not instantly gratifying.
Right.
Although it is as soon as they like look at that note and sing it and sing the next one.
Yep.
Like it is. As you just mentioned, there's so many things in the classroom that we do in our curriculum. So much of it, whether it's reading, whether it's the history, whether it's the vocal technique, sometimes if we can just get out of the way a little bit and let the kids like fumble through some things, we might find that it's not as grueling to do some of these tasks that we've just maybe have started to wonder, like, well, maybe this is the problem. Maybe this is the thing that's not making it equitable. Let kids, be wrong about what a text means for a little bit before we jump in and say, well, no, actually, this is what that poem is about because I've studied it. Let the kids like talk through it and, let them figure it out, because what we're also building is a trust factor that I think is critical that teachers ought to have with their students. If I can't trust my students, they will know that I don't trust them.
Yeah.
They'll know it, and they won't work. They won't work for me. They won't work with each other for me because they're not going to believe that I care if I don't trust them. And with that trust, over the course of some time will come the buy-in. It'll be there.
Yeah.
And I think we just got to if it worked well enough for us, and I'm probably going to mess this up, but I think if it worked well enough for us, I think it's still good for them. Like, I think the things that were good for us are good for our students. And I believe that literacy, the literature, and the wide range of literature is good for us. Even stuff, there's pieces that I can't stand and types of pieces that I can't stand just because it's not my style. But I'm still going to let the kids sing it because I want them to be exposed.
Yeah, because it might be their style.
Yeah, it might be their thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, that's really good. And that's a really good way to finish, because when you were making that your theory on why we talk about this so much and literacy so much, it being hard. And it's which makes it an easy target for people. So I had never really even thought of it that way, because it's also true, I think, that undergraduate music education programs don't teach people how to teach literacy very well. And so very few people can do it, and can do it really, really well, which means that you've got to have the resources, and you've got to have a teacher who's dedicated. You've got to have a teacher who's in one school for more than a few years, Yeah. And so it's an investment to have a big literacy program going in a high school, and more kids deserve it. I guess it sounds like we both agree on that. Theron, this was fun. This was fun. Thank you so much for chatting with me and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I hope we can do this again sometime and stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it. Hope you have a great semester. And with all, I know you got a lot of going on too, the busyness of the school stuff and the choirs you got outside. So looking forward for more content.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening to this episode. I really enjoyed having a conversation with Theron. I think he's got some really valuable insights into this topic. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, like it, share it. Even if you think it might stir some feathers, I think that's okay. These are conversations that need to happen. Don't forget, you can help out by using the Choralosophy promo code at checkout. And all of the sponsors for the website or for the show, that's Voce Vista, Sight Reading Factory, Graphite, Ryan Main, MyMusicBuilders.com. Don't forget to check out their Resonance 95 mask. And of course, even the free simple things. Leave comments, have conversations, share on Facebook, anytime you interact, it helps me get the word out about the show. Thanks, everybody.